Hello my friends, it's so good to be together. Hey, I am excited to start this new series called Walk This Way. But before I do, I'm sure behind me you see all these buckets filled. Our Hope City families are starting a summer bucket list that our family life director Melissa Swan kicked off just this weekend, all right? So these are going out, or maybe by this time have gone out to all families or most families, and it is a summer bucket, okay? And so in the summer bucket there's lots of good stuff. There's the book Love Does for Kids by Bob Goff, which is a devotional that our families will be reading with kids. There's lots of good stuff in here for ice cream Sundays because we're having a virtual ice cream party online. And there's also a family scavenger hunt where we'll be doing things with our family and neighbors and friends and then taking pictures and posting them online. So that's why you see all these here. And if you didn't get a bucket but you want to participate, this is the summer bucket list, okay? So you can just contact us at hello@hopecitych.com, and we would love to get out the packet, the information to you. It's going to be a great time this summer learning and growing in faith and connecting with our families. So that is why the back of my office is packed with colorful buckets, all right? And that's kicking off this week. It's just awesome. And a special props to Melissa Swan for all her hard work and creativity in serving our families. And with that, I'm starting this new series right now called Walk This Way. And I say walk this way because it's so important that we are people who walk the walk. And this path of following Jesus has daily implications in how we live our lives, how we speak, how we practice living in our city. So in this series, what we're going to look at is both the posture and the practice of our lives. How we see ourselves and how we see this world, and the things that we habitually do to strengthen those things. Okay, so when I say walk this way, we're learning to follow after Jesus, which means that sometimes we have to unlearn some old paths. How many of you are with me? We have to unlearn some old paths. In fact, I want to tell you a story. So years ago, I was an assistant cross-country coach. And if you want to know what that meant for me, it means they needed an adult who would just be there with the kids and make sure that they didn't get in trouble and be an encouragement and help. So I wasn't like the coach who actually taught them the best practices for running. I was just there to help keep them on the track, right? And so I was there for every practice, and we'd run up hills and down hills and do a lot of running in the woods because cross country is all about that extra distance and learning to pace yourself. So one day we happened to go out into the woods, and we were going deep out into logging roads and deep trails, and it wasn't an area I was familiar with, and some of our kids weren't familiar either. So as the main coach and some of the more informed kids that were fast started to run, I was the one that was behind with the slower group. Imagine that, right? And so as I was back there running, one of our kids that was running fast ahead, she talked to that crew and they said, listen, we need to make sure that the rest of our crew knows where to go. So they gave her directions on how to get out of the woods because we were pretty deep in. And she comes back and talks to us and says, I know the way out. They gave me the directions. You can follow me. All we have to do is run this way. So off we go. I'm sure some of you are getting that feeling, right? Like, uh-oh, this is not going to end well. And it didn't. So we follow her, and pretty soon we're going up this long logging road, then out into the woods and deep trails, and pretty soon it just ends. And we're looking around, and I'm thinking, we are not where we parked. You know, she did not lead us out. She led us further in. So I stopped her and said, listen, are you sure you know where we're going? And she said, yes. She said, they were so clear. All we had to do is come up until it splits and then turn left. So I said, say that one more time. And she looked at me and she said, with all sincerity, all we have to do is go up here and turn left. And she kept pointing right. So I said, that's not left. And she said, it is. She said, since I was young, I learned that if you want to know which way is left, you just hold up your hands, and the one that makes a capital L is left. Well, at this point, I grabbed her by the wrists and twisted them around, and I said, "You've been holding your hands up wrong," and showed her that this was the L and that this way was left. So after an embarrassing sigh from her, we started working our way down the hill and back into the woods, and we were quite a ways out. And this was, this was pre-cell phones. This was before everyone had a phone in their pocket. So we're just navigating our way out of the woods. And thankfully we find our way out and we're able to laugh. And from that moment on, we took a pen and we marked the letter L and the letter R on her shoes so that she would forever know which way to go. This series, Walk This Way, takes that idea that you have to understand not only which practices and postures help you follow after Jesus, but which ones you're going to have to leave behind. Which trails you have to be done running if you're going to truly walk a life of faith after Jesus. And so today's message really hits home because we're learning how to unwalk a certain path in this message. Today is about a serious condition, and it's somewhat contagious that we all have had at one point, and it's called complainitis. Today is about complaining. Now, some interesting things that I've observed about what happens when I complain. There's quite a few things that happen. One is that it doesn't get me anywhere that I want to get to. In fact, it reminds me of when we followed her deep into the woods. We got nowhere that we wanted to go, and complaining feels a lot that way. It gives me and it gives other people an incomplete and untrue picture of the situation. Third, it starts a hurtful cycle in my life. Because a complaining attitude, it makes people not want to be around me, which makes me upset and lonely and want to complain, and the cycle continues. Fourth, it creates an attitude that the world owes me, which makes it harder and harder to be grateful. And then fifth, complaining makes it easier and easier to complain about smaller and smaller things, which over time warps my perspective. Okay, and so you can see right away, and I'm sure you know, that complaining is just like a path deeper into the woods where we don't want to go instead of finding our way out of the woods. And so we're going to talk about the cure for complaining, and a disclaimer about today. Today is not about minimizing anyone's pain, especially if you face a seemingly insurmountable situation, okay? But I believe that our approach in those moments tells us if our problems are driving us or if we are driving our problems to God. Okay, so with that, today is a Quitters Club for complainers. And I hope that you'll join me as part of the Quitters Club. It's something so worth giving up. And it's so powerful and important to give up complaining. I mean, first of all, Paul the Apostle, who is one of the main authors of the New Testament part of the Bible, he clearly tells us not to. But he also does so in this way that explains a little bit of the poison that comes with complaining. All right? So we're going to be reading out of Philippians 2:14 through 15 today. It reads, "Do everything without complaining and arguing, so that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people." See, complaining, it gives people ammo for being critical of you. You may say, well, hey, you know what? The people who love me will just deal with me. I don't really find that to be true. Complainers actually damage their friendships and their relationships because they're hard to be around. It's draining. And it's difficult to see some kind of hope when there's so much doom and gloom. If we aren't complainers and we do live pure lives, Paul says we actually shine bright. And what a hope in this time. I want to be a bright spot in someone's day. I want to shine towards something good. Wouldn't you agree with me that there's just enough negativity in our world? And the good news is that God actually has a cure for our complaining. And man, it is a real 1-2 punch. And these are two of the most powerful works of God in our lives, both a posture and a practice that I believe God wants to implement in our hearts today. It's something that will revolutionize your relationships and your faith and energize your daily life. They're both a force to be reckoned with. And so I want to jump into these powerful cures to complainitis. So let's go. The first remedy for complainitis is the practice of gratitude. 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18 instructs us to rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. See, gratitude is powerful. The verse says that we can always rejoice, that we should continually pray, and that we should give thanks in everything. Now, gratitude, it isn't your head in the sand. Okay, this is not plastic. This is not fake. In fact, it can be as real as can get. For example, let's say I lose my job. Do I have to say, God, thank you that I lost my job? No, that's fake. That's actually kind of weird too. It kind of sounds sadistic. And what we have to key in on that verse is not give thanks for all circumstances, but to give thanks in all circumstances. And when you understand the difference, you can stop being defeated by a complaining attitude. See, we don't need to do some plastic gratitude routine and say, thanks that I lost my job. But instead, we do what this passage instructs us, which is get perspective in 3 ways: rejoicing, praying continually, and giving thanks. So the first one, rejoice in who God is at all times. And the perspective that we gain here is in the greatness and faithfulness of God, which will help us to stop rejoicing only when things are good, which teaches us the bad habit of rejoicing in circumstance, not in God. See, too many of us, we rejoice in our circumstance, but we don't rejoice in the goodness of God. So something goes good, we say, oh man, this is awesome. When something's bad, we don't know how to look and say, God, you are still good. So we rejoice in all, we rejoice in God always. Then the second thing is to pray continually. The perspective that we gain here is the constant reaching out and trusting in God, which will help us cultivate a relationship of trust and of trusting in God instead of only praying when it's fourth and long. You know, football maybe will come back, maybe it won't, I don't know. We see that baseball is just starting up and that's great. But when I think about football, I think about those moments where it's fourth down and they've got to go for it. And it's 20 yards to a first down and you're just hoping something good will happen. Unfortunately, this is how many of us approach our life of prayer, is we pray only when things are desperate. You know, when it's this last moment, then we look to God. But to pray continually, that changes our perspective. It invites God into every moment of our day. And then third, it tells us to give thanks in all circumstances. The perspective that we gain here is that even when we face difficult things, there's something that we can find to be thankful for. And this puts life in perspective for us, and it helps us to be solution-minded. So instead of complaining, we actually look for things we can do, things we can change, ways that we can act, ways that we can be better. Give thanks. And friends, it is the cure for what ails you. And here's a great exercise for this week or all this month. Think back to a circumstance that in itself isn't really something to give thanks for. I want you to go back to that, and then what in that circumstance can you thank God for? In fact, it's good to be able to do it right now as you're listening to me, to stop and just think, in what way can I give thanks to God in a circumstance that was really difficult and for itself I couldn't really give thanks? Rejoice, pray, and give thanks. Here's the second remedy for complainitis. It's contentment. Philippians 4:10 through 13, again, this is Paul speaking, and he says, I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through Him who gives me strength. Friends, when we complain, we are looking at a preconceived idea about how something should be. And it's not that things shouldn't change. Change is powerful. Change is awesome. Some things need to change, right? We also want to set big goals and reach them. We want to chase a dream. We want to believe for great things, and we want to try with all we have. So what's up with contentment? What is it all about? First, it's not settling. Not at all. Contentment isn't throwing our hands in the air exasperated and saying, well, I guess this is life and I just have to accept it. In fact, it's much more powerful than all that. The best way I could say it is this way. Contentment is peace in our hearts that is not dependent on our situation. Not our wealth, not our comfort, not our lack, nor our surplus. It's letting Jesus be enough. Because until he is enough, nothing is. So, for instance, a new job, maybe for you might be a great goal, but thinking that you'll be something once you have that new job will create a discontent in you that nothing in this world cures. Look back at that verse. I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. It's the posture of contentment. Now, Paul, who wrote this was a hardworking, well-educated man. I mean, one of the top-tier educated men of his time and culture. He had lived a life that at times had all that it should fulfill a man on this earth. And he also lived a life of sickness, poverty, and even imprisonment. He had discovered this secret contentment, whether he was at the top of his game and had all things, or was in poverty and sickness and imprisonment and had next to nothing in the ways of the world. He discovered a secret. His power was in Jesus. With Jesus, he now had a fullness, a completeness. See, 3 days before Jesus rose miraculously from the grave, he died, and his last words on the cross were this: "It is finished," which is recorded in John 19:30. Jesus is telling us, it's all done. The price for sin is paid. I open the door for you to be fully loved and accepted and forgiven by God. What he did on the cross restored the gap between man and God and made the opportunity for restored relationship. He was saying, be content in who I am. I'm enough for you. It's finished. You don't have to earn me. In fact, you can't earn me, but you can have me. And you can find an unstoppable power in me, contentment in me that defies mansions and alleys. See, here's the crux of this. Contentment tells us who Jesus is and what he did for us is enough for our identity to be rooted in him, to find peace in him, and that in his power we have all we need, whether mansion or alley. So when we complain, we're saying things aren't how they should be. And Jesus says, yeah, I know. But talking about it gets you nowhere. If you want to go somewhere, abide in my power. Be content in what I'm seeking to do in you and through you. And practice gratitude. So as we wrap up, I have a challenge for you this week. And it's a challenge I'm taking all this week. It's every day do 2 things. The first, give thanks to God for 3 things every day this week. And number 2, write a text or actually mail or send a note thanking somebody every day this week. All right, so that's 2 things. You wanna move on from the path of complaining and walk towards contentment and gratitude. Let's do these 2 things every day this week. Give thanks to God for 3 things every day and write a note to somebody thanking them every day this week. Sounds like a lot? But I'll tell you what, I can think of the time I've wasted complaining every day. I could probably fill 1,000 notes with the time I've wasted. Let's focus in not only on the posture of contentment, but the practice of gratitude. And as we close, I'd like you to join me in this prayer. Jesus, help me live with a posture of contentment. Open my eyes to see what it means that I'm a child of God. I confess my sometimes critical, complaining heart to you. Forgive me of my short-sightedness. Help me to practice gratitude daily and to see the blessings you've poured into each day. When I'm tempted to complain, remind me of all that I have in you and all that you are to me. I rejoice in you and find my joy in you.